Well, good afternoon, WKU faculty and staff, and welcome to the Fall 2022 GRADLEARN series. The GRADLEARN series is an opportunity for WKU faculty and staff to listen to leading experts from the nation and to bring about evidence-based practices knowledge so that we can drive innovation in graduate studies at WKU. Today is the fifth in our series, and it's a continued partnership with ETS GRE. And we will have Dr. Terry Ackerman and Dr. Maureen Grasso talk about holistic admissions, diversity, and student success. I will turn the Zoom session over to Ms. Catherine Schultz, who is the Director of Academic Partnerships at ETS, and we are truly grateful to her, and Ms. Dawn Lipker, who is an Associate Director at ETS. Again, in charge of academic partnerships. Ms. Schultz, thank you so very much for facilitating today's meeting and for the continued collaboration between WKU and ETS.
Thank you, Dr. Kudali. Hello and welcome to today's webinar. As Dr. Kudali said, it's entitled Connecting Holistic Admissions, Diversity, and Student Success. I am Catherine Schultz, the Director of Academic Partnerships at ETS, and your main point of contact for questions that you might have around holistic admissions, the GRE tests and services, as well as the TOEFL family of assessments. Well, thank you again for joining us. Before we get started, we have a couple housekeeping items. First, I believe the lines were muted as you joined the session to cut out on the background noise, but we definitely do want to hear from you. So as questions arise throughout the session, please feel free to put those into the chat section, and Dawn and I will be monitoring those. And we'll probably hold off on answering those until the Q&A section of the presentation today, because we have a lot of information to get through. But we will also be recording this session, and Dr. Kudali will share this out along with a PDF of the presentation today. Well, so now on to our speakers, Dr. Terry Ackerman and Dr. Maureen Grasso. Terry is currently a distinguished visiting professor in the College of Education at the University of Iowa in the Department of Psychological and Quantitative Foundations. One of his areas of expertise is test bias and differential item and test functioning. Previously, he served as a department chair and associate dean of research at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. He also chaired the GRE Technical Advisory Committee and served as president of the National Council on Measurement in Education, and was also the president of the Psychometric Society, two international organizations dedicated to the advancement of measurement practices in education, psychology, and the social sciences. Maureen is an ASHRAE Fellow and a professor in the Wilson College of Textiles at North Carolina State University. She served as Dean of the Graduate School at North Carolina State University and at the University of Georgia. She has received numerous awards and recognition for her work, including the Southern Graduate School's Achievement Award for outstanding contributions to graduate education. She served on the board of directors of the Council of Graduate Schools and in key leadership positions for the Conference of Southern Graduate Schools, including president. She also served on the National Academy of Sciences Committee on revitalizing graduate STEM education for the 21st century. We are very proud to have Terry and Maureen as ETS's graduate education advisors, and very excited that they are here today. Terry and Maureen, please take it away.
Great, thank you. Great to be here, everyone. Thank you for taking time to join us. So you can see the overview of what we'll be speaking about, a little bit about ETS engagement with the graduate community, a search for desired evidence in application portfolios, and then some challenges in admissions, many of which you are probably very familiar with, and we'll spend a majority of our time today talking about holistic admission process. And then if there's time at the end, a little case study from UGA while I was dean. So in the next few slides, I'll share a bit of information about how ETS engages with the graduate community. ETS is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. Its mission is to help advance quality in education and equity in education. It was founded in 1947, so 70 plus years of experience in educational research and assessment. And what's interesting, I thought, for me, because as I've worked with ETS over the years, I wasn't aware that they develop and administer and score 50 million tests annually. In 180 countries, including programs for the US and other governments, including managing major contracts for NAEP for the US government and the International PISA and PIAC surveys for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And then ETS also invests significant investment in finding solutions to educational challenges to focus on improving outcomes for all. So a little bit about who we are. In 2019, ETS created the Office for Graduate Education and Engagement and identified 5 key strategic advisors. And we sort of have boots on the ground experience in graduate education from different campuses and also from different disciplines. They also established more recently the Academic Partnership Team to work with you to understand your challenges and to help solving some of those challenges with a whole support team to provide training and answering questions regarding the GRE. Here are our 5 key strategic advisors. Today, Terry and I are representing ETS, and it's a very unique role we bring to the conversation with ETS and with colleagues like yourself, our many years of experience. As I mentioned, boots on the ground. I think our colleague, Dr. Felder, totaled up all our sum of years of experience in graduate education, and I'm sure it was over 100. So you see Terry from Iowa, John Augusta from Georgia State, Frankie Felder from Clemson, myself, and then Carlos Grijalva from UCLA. Our charge is to provide thought leadership around holistic admissions, research best practices, both to ETS and to the graduate community. Now, we've been visiting campuses nationwide to exchange knowledge about admissions, best practices, learning from the faculty on the different campuses and sharing our knowledge as well. And so you can see some of the campuses that we're visiting. And so we'd like to explore a little further with you on how we can collaborate in the future.
The search for desired evidence in application portfolios. Being explicit about what evidence you expect to find in each component of the application and being aware of the purpose, benefits, and limitations, as well as how to mitigate those limitations, can help keep the process as equitable as possible in working to achieve your program enrollment goals. And here you see 6 pieces of evidence that are usually collected on our applicants: cognitive skills, academic background, personal attributes, work experience, interests and passions, and information that helps us to discern how the applicant will fit with our program goals and mission. So we have 2 polling questions, and I'm going to read through the question. I know we're not actually going to conduct a poll, but I just want you to think about this question and how you would respond to it. The question is, have you mapped the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to successfully navigate your graduate programs onto each element of your holistic admissions portfolio? So just think about that for a second, about that mapping exercise, and if you have attempted to figure out how you're going to use each piece of information and what information should it provide about the applicant. Now, when we usually have this at the university's presentations that Maureen just showed you, many people responded no. And let me give you an example of what we're talking about. Here's an example of a chart that we think is very helpful for admissions committees to actually create and use. On the left-hand column are pieces of the holistic portfolio, and across the top are the information we seek to better understand our applicant. And you can see, for example, some pieces of information provide more insight into the applicant than others. For example, the statement of purpose provides information about academic background, personal attributes, work experience, interests and passions, and fit with our program goals and missions. So creating a chart like this really helps members of the admissions committee better understand what information you're getting from each element of the holistic portfolio.
And so now I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the graduate admissions and challenges that we've been hearing from our colleagues across the nation. And so one of the things that we keep hearing is, okay, we want to recruit and admit underrepresented minority students, but there's a challenge. How do we get them into our pool of applicants? Or we're looking for the best students who match my research needs and interests and who will persevere and finish the program. We know there's never enough money, and I hear that from many, many campuses. And the other thing that we're hearing is that for some programs, the pool of applicants are so large that there's not enough time to really review everyone. And so they end up using a cut score and just to get through the number of applicants. And I'd have to say that is not a best practice. A major question as a result of COVID and other conversations going around is how do we evaluate whether or not we should return to the GRE? In addition, we find because of COVID, practices changed. And on our campus and through the 16 campuses in the state of North Carolina, during the last couple years, we were encouraged to give every student a pass-fail rather than a letter grade. We've since stopped that practice, but that raises a question when you're trying to evaluate a transcript of an applicant and you're looking at foundational courses to really understand their full knowledge of the material with a satisfactory grade. Or this is another one. We find the best students, but they often decline and go to University X because they perceive University X as having a better reputation. And I hear that from all sorts of campuses, large, small, well-endowed campuses, as well as Ivy Leagues. And then something I always heard from my faculty at Georgia, if we could only bring them here to meet our faculty and see our facilities, they would seriously consider us, especially students from the West or other parts of the country. So let's focus now on looking at using a holistic admission process. And to begin talking about holistic admission, we have to go back and look at the foundational work that ETS did to identify promising practices and the materials that have been developed. They took time to visit campuses and did interviews with deans and faculty, and you can see all the disciplines there. In addition, as we would do with any project ourselves, is do a literature review. And they went back as early as 1950s to look at the published work related to graduate admissions, and then pulled other sources in from the Council of Graduate Schools. At the bottom, you'll see a great link. It says see sources at www.holisticadmissions.org/navigate/more-information/. You will find great information there. And so when you get the PDF, you can click on that and that will take you to some great resources. So, why should we use a holistic admission process? What are the benefits? I think that when we're looking at our applicant pool, we're trying to get a clear picture of the potential of the applicant and their fit with the program. We're trying to identify applicants who are going to be successful in our programs, and we want to be fair in the review of all applicants. And as our colleague Mark Smith says, central to the concept of holistic application review is looking at everything a candidate has submitted, understanding unconscious biases, and being aware of inequities in access to opportunities. The last part of his quote is very critical, especially if you're looking to increase the diversity in your program. So what is holistic admission? I like to think of it as sort of a balance. We're balancing all the information that we're bringing in. We need to identify what criteria are considered. Then we have to think about, well, what order should we look at that criteria? We also have to think about who is considering that criteria, who's at the table making the decision. And then how are the criteria weighted based on the goals of the particular program? So if we look at holistic admission, it's really simple. It's 5 steps. This is the first step, preparing for the admission process. And I would have to say that is the most important process. That begins everything. And what we find as I talk with faculty across the nation is that we tend not to prepare for the admission process. Step number 2, we're all good at. We collect information. Step 3, we review the applicant. Step 4, we're selecting them. And step 5, we evaluate the admission process. That's another step that most faculty, once we've made the decision, we move on. And so it is important to evaluate the process, to give feedback to step number 1. So let's look at step number 1. Preparing for the admission process. And in this step, what we're doing is sort of setting the goals and the guiding principles. We're trying to structure the process to achieve our goals, consider the composition of the committee. As our colleague Janet Rutledge says, we must commit to holistic evaluation to get a true sense of who an applicant is and can become. So in step 1, what we're doing is goal setting. If I were to ask you, okay, write down your definition of success. Okay. And then I'm going to ask you to write down, well, what evidence do you have of success when you're thinking about your admissions process and you're thinking about your students? As we go around the room, and if you were all to share, what we would find is that there would be some of us that would agree. And we would find certain components where they were almost identical. In other cases, not so much. And so it's real important as we begin step 1 in the goal setting process is to begin with defining what we mean by success and how do we know when we've achieved a success. So we also need to set goals that align with the mission of our program and institution. And it could be like experiences that we're looking for in our students, what kinds of, whether we want to increase diversity, etc. And then establishing principles to align with the core values of the program and the institution. Why is this so important? It's important so that all parties can understand and be clear about how the admissions committee is making decisions. In some cases, programs are small so that all the faculty are making the decisions. In other cases, there's a committee that makes that decision. And so we want to understand and be transparent. For example, one of the guiding principles might be all applicants will be evaluated holistically by a team trained in mitigating bias. So applicants are selected on as fairly as possible. That could be a guiding principle. Once you've established the goals and the guiding principles, that will inform every step of the rest of the process in admissions, from recruiting through enrollment. And so I also want to say that it's also important that each component of the application be considered as part of this guiding principle. We want to think about the order in which those components will be reviewed. Reviewing a set of applicant materials in a different order can have a meaningful impact on the resulting decision due to the framing effect, in which a framing effect is where a particular choice may be different depending on the ways and how the material is presented. Reviewers should be aware of appropriate and inappropriate inferences that can be made about each component of the application. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And we'll also talk a little bit about the role of unconscious and implicit bias and how that plays into the admissions process. The document to the right, where it says download here, I encourage you to do that and print it out and share it with your faculty or email it to your faculty. This is a great place to begin. It's a discussion guide. It asks questions. It doesn't give us the answers, but it asks a lot of questions and helps us to begin to think about our admissions goals and practices and questions to consider. As we continue, we're preparing for the admission process. We need to think about our composition and training of the committee. Given the faculty committee's powerful role in the admissions process, it makes good sense to evaluate the composition of the committee itself to ensure that all members understand the goals, principles, and processes before the start of the admissions season. When evaluating the composition of the committee itself, we need to consider whether or not there is a balance of power among the team members to prevent one person from having undue influence over which students are admitted. Now, we're all humans, and therefore we're susceptible to biases. And these can be mitigated by ensuring that a variety of perspectives and experiences are reflected in the makeup of the committee membership. Some programs that we've talked with across the nation understand the reputation of undergraduate institutions over another institution that they may not be as familiar with. And so what we find is that bias creeps in just from that fact that I'm more familiar with this institution, so these students must be better versus another institution. We also have to think about creating a program through which faculty can work with underrepresented minority students. So summer programs, training committee members in terms of the goals and processes. And Cornell University has a great resource here where you click on and you can go to their site and you can see some videos and links to training.
So let's talk about step 2, collecting applicant information. Before collecting, it's essential to first determine the evidence needed from applicants in order to assess their knowledge, skills, experiences, and personal attributes. This is also the time to ensure the application explicitly requests the desired information that all information can easily be found on the program's website. The last promising practice is to collect comparable information from all applicants. And here you see a quote from Maureen. A complete assessment of each applicant is important to identifying the best graduate students for your program, including GRE scores, is essential in having a full understanding of the potential of each applicant. It's very challenging to try to gauge the quality of international students and degrees. What we have, the challenge is looking at the degrees, the transcripts from international universities. And some programs will use to evaluate from different international applications. The International Handbook of Universities, others will use World Education Service. There's also educational credential evaluators. But transcript evaluation from international applicants is always a challenge. And one of the best ways to understand the English fluency of international applicants is to use the standardized test, the TOEFL. Applicants who have completed studies at and received diplomas or professional titles, institutions outside the United States, when they take the TOEFL, they actually have to take 4 different tests. They have to take a test in reading, a test in listening, a test in speaking, and a test in writing. So by looking at the TOEFL results, the scores range from 0 to 30, and there's also a description of advanced, high intermediate, low intermediate, and such that help faculty better interpret the fluency, the English fluency of the international applicants. So this is so important when we're reviewing international applications. Evidence should be broad in scope, and when we talk about the holistic process, we're talking about the personal statement or the statement of purpose and the resume / CV. We're also talking about undergraduate GPA. And sometimes when we look at transcripts, we're looking at, we could look at the GPA in their major and such, and also look at longitudinally as the applicants start to take more classes in their major, do we see the grades start to increase as they move into their major area. There's also standardized assessment. One is the TOEFL, which I just mentioned, but there's also the GRE general test. And then personal attribute documentation, such as a personal statement. Personal statement usually helps the student provide a good insight into where do they see themselves 3 or 4 years down the road. There's also letters of recommendation. And another great document to sort of get more insight into this process is understanding sources, the purpose, pros and cons of application criteria. And everybody will receive a PDF of this presentation, and on the PDF, as Maureen said, what you should do is just click on the link and you will have access to this documentation. So here's our second poll. And again, we're not going to physically take the poll, but I do want you to take a couple moments to think about this question. Which, if any, of the skills / abilities that are listed here are important for students to do well in your program? And just go down the list and think about each of the skills. And in your mind, sort of check off, yes, that particular skill is kind of crucial for a student to be successful in our program. So I'll just give you a little bit to go down the list. And you notice as you move down the list, you start saying, well, this and probably this. Well, at the very bottom, there's an option to select all of the above. So just take a second and look through the list. And which of those are really key to being successful in your program? Now, when we do conduct this poll at different universities, quite often what happens is faculty will start checking, and then all of a sudden they move to, yes, all of the above. So a lot of times, more than half of the faculty at the different institutions where we have presented will check all of the above. The reason I'm asking you this question and want you to consider it is because all of these skills are being measured by the GRE general test. And so it's important, I'm just trying to emphasize the importance of the GRE in the holistic application process. Now, what are the risks of eliminating the GRE? Because we've talked to programs where they made the GRE optional or have eliminated. Well, one of the problems is you're removing the only standardized, directly comparable measure of preparedness for graduate school from the admissions evaluation process. The GRE is the only standardized measure of all of those measures I just listed, personal statement and so forth, that is in the application. Applicants lose an opportunity to highlight strong scores and present themselves in the best possible light. Admissions committees are left completely reliant on trying to compare and to equate things like GPAs across institution over time. There's also the issue of grade inflation, which I'll mention in just a bit. But here you see another good resource that you should consider. Eliminating the GRE test in graduate admissions increases barriers for students. So again, when you get the PDF of our presentation, please click on this link for further insight. Now, a lot of our presentation focuses on using well-established research and well-established current research. So when we make claims about using the GRE, those claims are made based upon current research that is done in graduate admissions process. There's a new article that just came out by Newman et al. In 2022. It's in the International Journal of Testing, and at the bottom you can actually see the link for that article. But I just want to highlight a few things from that article. The group mean race gaps in scholastic tests are widely known, but not widely understood. These tests appear to provide, and we're talking about the GRE, these tests appear to provide standardized measures of a subset of scholastic knowledge and skills that are distributed in society in a very biased manner. Access to this knowledge itself varies by race for reasons described below. And key thing is systematic racism has had real consequences in the academic domain. And what it's talking about in the article is it is true that there are group differences, say, between Black examinees and white examinees on the GRE, but that holds true for any standardized instrument. And the causes are not bias in the test itself. Causes are bias in American society and the differences in opportunities that are presented to white examinees and Black examinees. So again, this is a great article that I would encourage you strongly to look at. I also wanted to point out that there's a joint letter that was created from the civil rights, social justice, disability rights, and education advocates that mentions that annual assessments, such as the GRE, are imperative to have accurate information. And the use of standardized tests has helped reveal longstanding achievement gap and racial disparities in academic opportunity and provide the evidence used by civil rights groups to advocate for change in society. You see the link at the bottom of the slide, and you see the symbols such as National Urban League, National Action Network, Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates, National Center for Learning Disabilities, and so forth. Educational opportunities and life circumstances can have a substantial influence on all components of the application, including the letters of recommendation, reputation of undergraduate institutions, personal statements, undergraduate GPA, and GRE scores. And off to the left, what you see is that the average GPA for four-year colleges and universities has actually increased over the past 30 years. And that increase is even larger in private schools. So the chart on the left is just basically showing you grade inflation over the past couple decades and how admissions committees should be sensitive to that inflation. But only the GRE of those components, 5 components I've listed above, only the GRE is backed by ongoing research are overseen by a board of graduate deans or your peers, meet and exceed industry psychometric standards, and have processes to ensure that they are free from bias as possible. And here you see a link to a document entitled ETS Fairness. Now, new research, another new article, which is very easy to read. It's sort of a meta-analysis. It's not strictly a meta-analysis, but what they did is they actually reviewed research that looked at the different components that are used in holistic admissions. And the key findings, the GRE scores are susceptible to the fewest potential sources of systematic variance when compared to the other evaluation processes. And at the bottom, you see the article by Wu et al. That just came out in 2022. At the beginning, they take great effort to explain to the reader the difference between bias, fairness, and validity. So and it's in the journal called Perspectives on Psychological Science. I strongly encourage you to look at that article. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the elements of the holistic portfolio, and I'm going to talk about the purpose, benefits, drawbacks, and mitigation of each. I'll quickly go through and look at those 4 elements for each of the pieces of the holistic portfolio. So let's start with the personal statement. Personal statement is an opportunity for the applicant to showcase their passions, personality, and potential in the program. The benefits, the personal statement serves to put a face on the more objective and quantitative credentials a candidate submits. The statement reminds the reviewers or the applicants that the applicants are individuals with unique experiences, backgrounds, and points of view that can enrich and contribute to the graduate's program broader objectives of maintaining diversity of thought. It also helps reviewers learn more about the applicant's intent and suitability to the program. Now, there are drawbacks. The drawbacks, the personal statement is especially subjective application component that can be perceived very differently depending on the reviewer's background, preferences, or values. Compounding this effect is the language used by the faculty in designing the application. If it's not highly explicit, it can open up the interpretation. For example, if request simply reads personal statement or personal statement of goals, the applicant may interpret this to request for a personal story versus one more focused on career aspirations, which is what the committee may be looking for. Another example is asking for relevant experiences, where relevant may be interpreted strictly as internships or research experience versus experience that reflect determination, hard work, commitment, and so forth. Well, how do we mitigate this? Well, to mitigate it, make sure that the personal statement provides insights on the applicant's ability to be persistent and resilient. Have several committee members, including some of your graduate students, read the application for directions. Are the directions clear and lucid? Have several committee members review the personal statement to gather multiple perspectives. Consider using descriptive rubrics to delineate the specific criteria, to maybe have a common scale to evaluate each of the personal statements. And it must be targeted to the directions for the personal statement must be targeted to elicit information the committee is looking for. Here are some examples. Carlos Grajava, one of our advisor colleagues, provided these that UCLA uses. And I just want to go through one of these. And remember, the directions to your applicants have to be very, very specific And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the applicant to provide the information that you feel is very important. So the first example, are there educational, personal, cultural, economic, or social experiences not described in your statement of purpose that have shaped your academic journey? If so, how? Have any of these experiences provided unique perspectives that you would contribute to our program, field, or profession? So this is, here you see on the bullets are just two examples that are used. But the other thing, what I would do is I would encourage each program to request the directions for writing the personal statement from other programs. I'm not saying that yours are poorly written or that you need to sort of copy, but it just gives you ideas of maybe how you can articulate and be more explicit about the information that you're looking for in the personal statement. The statement of purpose, what we're looking for is opportunity for the applicant to indicate the reason for applying for graduate study in a specified degree program. For example, what we're looking for is, where do you see yourself and how can our program help you achieve this? Where do you see yourself 3 or 4 years down the road? What would you like to be doing? What are you passionate about career-wise? The benefits, it helps reviewers understand the experiences that have prepared the student for advanced study, helps reviewers decide if the applicant is a good fit. Can our program help this applicant achieve their career goals? Students may not understand the purpose. A drawback, the student may not understand the purpose unless instructions are clear. The reviewer might not agree with the applicant's career goals. And a lot of times when when applicants submit their materials, it could be heavily coached or edited by faculty members before that material is actually submitted. How do we mitigate some of the drawbacks? Make sure the statement of purpose aligns with the program goals, provide clear instructions on the content that is expected, have several reviewers read the statement, and consider using a rubric to evaluate the statement of purpose. Rubrics are very, very key, and Maureen will talk further about rubrics. Letters of recommendation. Purpose is it provides a unique role as a third-party assessment and endorsement. It indicates attributes and ability for the applicant to succeed. Some of the benefits, it's authentic perceptions of previous achievements in class, maybe in a lab, maybe presentations that the individual has made. Provides concrete examples of subjective traits that may be described elsewhere. And one key thing that we talk about when we do our presentations is using the different elements of the holistic portfolio to cross-validate other elements. I think that is so key. So if you see something that's sticking out in one piece of information, is that corroborated in other pieces of the holistic portfolio? I think that's so key. Let me go on to the drawbacks. Letters of recommendation can be highly subjective and tend to have positive bias. Sometimes faculty members will know the individual writing the letter of recommendation, and some of the status of the individual recommender will sort of flow over and sort of give you positive bias about that applicant. It may be prone to gender bias. recommenders may write out of courtesy. A lot of times undergraduates will pick a professor, but they may have been one of 75 students. So it's really hard for that professor to really get into detail about the qualities, the challenges maybe that student faced and how they overcame them and such. Some letters, a lot of times faculty, what they will do, we've heard instances about this, where faculty will say to the student, well, why don't you draft my letter of recommendation, and then I'll sort of change and rewrite parts of it, but that'll sort of save me time and I can be a little bit more accurate. So that's obviously not a good road to go down. And another drawback, reviewers tend to favor letters that come from people they know, like I mentioned earlier for the first bullet, or prestigious institution that Maureen had mentioned earlier. How do we mitigate this? Pay special attention to the language used and specific examples. Articulate specific dispositions to be addressed and request related examples as evidence. Consider providing a standard form with metrics where recommenders would rate in particular scenarios. Have a diverse group of reviewers read the letters, and again, use a rubric to evaluate letters of recommendation based on intentional instructions provided by the recommender. Resumes and research experience. Purpose is to show applicants have practically applied ideas and concepts learned in the classroom, can indicate specialized areas of experience. The benefits, undergraduate and postgraduate research helps show reviewers that applicants possess the skills and dispositions needed to conduct extensive research and make substantive contributions to their selected fields. Likewise, professional degree seekers' resumes and past work experience or internship experiences provide proof of practical skills that can be advanced or build upon in the classroom. The drawbacks, the ability of the applicant to perform extracurricular research or take unpaid or low-paying internships requires a certain level of privilege not afforded to all applicants. Factors such as financial resources, family obligation, urban versus rural location, strength of the social network, type of undergraduate institution, whether it's liberal arts college, community college, research university, and the availability of funding all deeply impact the opportunity of applicants to gather relevant experience. And how do we mitigate this? It's important for reviewers to understand the role of privilege and its impact on resumes. Some applicants may question whether their work experience is directly relevant to the graduate school pursuits and thus not fully provide pertinent information. As with other application materials, it's important to be explicit and transparent regarding the information to be included in the resume. And sometimes too, one of the problems with resumes is that applicants may have taken time off. So there's a gap where maybe the student graduated and then seeks work experience and then decides to go back. And that's a little bit different type of resume that needs to be compared with students who are coming right from the undergraduate into graduate school. Last one, interviews. Purpose is to ensure there's a good fit between the student's aspirations and the department's offerings. Taps into the student's communication skills, both nonverbal and verbal, and it taps into their interpersonal and intrapersonal skills. Gives the benefits. Interviews give more insight into the candidate, allows you to ask additional questions about specific points in the application. So this is exactly what I was referring to earlier, where you can sort of cross-validate other information from the candidate's application portfolio. And it's one more piece of information to get the best perspective on the student. Drawbacks, There may be an over-reliance on the interview over other pieces of information. It can be influenced by conscious and unconscious biases. An unstructured interview may not provide the information the program needs to make informed decisions. And some students might be at a disadvantage due to cultural differences. And how do we mitigate these drawbacks? It's important for the interview to be standardized. Make sure you're asking a standard set of questions of all applicants so you have a common piece of information to compare across applicants. Use a rubric. This is so key. And you need to be intentional about the purpose of the interview. Being intentional about writing in directions, or being intentional about how you're going to, Maureen talked about the order in which you review application materials is so key, and that always comes up. Here's an excellent source, from the Georgetown University of Medicine on mitigating bias. So again, I would encourage you to click on and look at that. The next couple of slides summarize everything I've talked about into a chart where for each piece of the application criteria, you have listed in bulleted form the purpose, the benefits, drawbacks, and mitigation from the transcripts, GRE scores, personal statement, statement of purpose, and letters of recommendation, the resume or research experience, and interviews. So these 3 slides are really key. So when you get the PDF, I would print this out and make sure that your committee talks about this, these particular ones, and the purpose, the benefits, the drawbacks, and the mitigation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Maureen, and she'll go on to step 3.
So step 3, we're reviewing the applicant. And as our colleague Michael Cunningham says, a holistic process is both inclusive of both objective and subjective measures, and that is inherently fairer and more respectful to the applicants, while also helping programs better meet their needs. So we're talking about it's important for programs to adopt a truly holistic review process, consider multiple criteria, and explore some alternate processes. And we'll talk some about that. So in the next slide, what we're talking about is how applications are reviewed, by whom, and in what order can result in the framing effect I mentioned earlier, and significantly influence the outcomes. The framing effect is a cognitive bias in which people react to a particular choice in different ways based upon how it was presented. For example, if a reviewer is first exposed to information about the applicant's low GPA and average GRE scores, the reviewer may review subsequent information with less interest or greater skepticism. If the reviewer is first exposed to evidence of the applicant's significant contributions to the field or impressive research work, the information about the applicant's undergraduate GPA and GRE scores may seem less important. My faculty at the University of Georgia figured this out, and they realized that how the order in which material was presented made a big difference, and they started to control for that. So to avoid the framing effect, this is some of the things that they did. They ensured that faculty members who read the letters or personal statements or conducted the interviews were not exposed to information about the GRE or GPA ahead of time. Each committee member, they made sure, and we also encourage, reviews all of the application materials in the same order and completely independently. And this is to help increase the quality and diversity of the incoming class. And to check out the ways to sort of avoid bias in interviews and letters of recommendation is this alternative methods in the interviewing and letters of recommendation by Georgetown University School of Medicine. And I encourage you to click on that, because it's amazing how that unconscious bias just creeps right in. Step 4, selecting the applicants. So my colleague Joanne Canales says making admissions decision is an art and a science. Information about personal attributes and passions found in the personal statements and recommendations serve as the art. Information about the applicant's critical thinking skills provided through the GRE serves as a science. Both are important. So what we're trying to do through this whole process is balance qualitative measures. Now, some programs bring in cohorts, so they have to consider the composition of the class as a whole. Now, one of the things that I found very useful to me, and I've seen it done at the university at all different levels, and I'm going to talk about slightly different, but it relates to the rubric. When we would be interviewing or thinking about interviewing for a high-level university position, vice president or chancellor, whoever, we would be trained. We would bring in key people to help us understand bias. And so and I'm not an expert, so the experts would come in and do a training session for the faculty on the committee. They would also work with us to develop a rubric. Okay, we've written that statement. We are getting ready to interview the applicants or the candidates. What's important? Where do we want to put our weights? And so using a scorecard is really important. And it's not, I like to call it more a rubric than a scorecard. So in selecting the applicants in the next slide, you want to use the tools to help ensure that we evaluate the applicants consistently in alignment with the program goals. So it goes back to step one. Okay, so some programs use the rubrics to ensure that the reviewers evaluate applicants consistently and in alignment with the program goals. Components of that program will consider things more important. So maybe there's more emphasis on research, or you pick what's important, and then you weight those criteria more. And then you assign a range of scores depending on whether the evidence received demonstrates the skills. The rubric also can recommend action for the committee to take based on the total range of scores. It's a beginning of a discussion. And I think that's what's so important in all of this, because if each one were to use that rubric, we might rate them, each applicant, a little bit differently. And by the time we get to that total range of scores, we're ready to have a conversation about what we've observed in the material. And there's a good example there that you can download for rubric. So here's an example for just illustrative purposes. In this example, the program is prioritizing applicants who have research experience. Has the applicant presented posters at conferences or received awards related to their research or written some articles? In the right column, you can see the program shows it values quantitative reasoning and analytical writing skills above verbal reasoning skills. Look at the way the points are distributed. You get to set this. You know what the components of criteria are. You sit down and have this conversation at the beginning, at step one. And so there was a question about what do we mean by success? Success of admission process, success of the students, it's both. You have certain goals that you're trying to achieve in the admission process. Maybe it's more diversity, whatever that goal is. But as we talk with faculty, a lot of them go, I want the student to be successful in the program and graduate. Well, then what's the evidence that you need on the front end to, you can't predict, but help you make that best decision that they're going to succeed? Look at the bottom right, the total score. So there's definitely students that will get in that strong admit or that admit. What I want you to look at are the students in the 14 to 16 range, the probable admit, and then the 10 to 13 probable deny. That's where you need to have your conversation. And my sense is that each one of you will see something that is really a positive and that can make a contribution for that student to be admitted into the program, or maybe not. And so having a conversation is really important. So let's move on and look at step 5. And this is a step, okay, so, in the spring, we've sent out the letters and we've finished, the admission process, and now we're ready to go back to our regular lives and research and teaching and everything, committee service and professional contributions that we do with our professional societies. But it's important to stop and evaluate the admission process. And what we want to do is reflect on sort of the outcome data and the inputs, reflect on past students to gain insight. And as we go along in this whole process until graduation, some students drop out. So we want to understand why they're dropping out. And our colleague, Carlos Grajava, says, be careful about placing blame for low completion rates on inputs. That's what we're doing in the admission process, considered during admissions. Completion is more often caused by what happens after enrollment. And programs and institutions can often influence outcomes by developing strong mentorship programs and a culture of inclusion. So it's important to evaluate and measure outcomes data against admissions information to help ensure that the admissions policies and practices are producing the desired outcomes regarding the institutional program goals, as well as the composition of the student body or population. As observed, patterns between admission data and important student outcomes may be useful in refining our practices and future research cycles, admission cycles. For example, maybe we're not getting what we're looking for in our personal statement. It's not coming through the kinds of information that we need. Same thing could be true in the letters of recommendation. We just say, oh, write a letter. Well, let's give some guidance, and perhaps maybe you do this already. But again, looking at the kind of information you're receiving, and then does that provide you with what you're looking for? Do you need to fine tune it a little bit further? So if the goals haven't been met, review your strategies for recruiting and nurturing relationships. And here is a wonderful model for holistic review and graduate admissions that decouples the GRE test from race, ethnicity, and gender. And I encourage you to take a look at that and download it when you receive it. Now, it's important to exercise care when comparing outcomes and inputs, as many factors contribute toward whether a student is successful in our programs. In a study exploring the reasons students did not complete graduate school programs, and this study was done for the National Center for Education Statistics, the researchers of that study identified change in family status, job, military conflict, dissatisfaction as the top 3 of 15 reasons why students drop out. Many inputs, including the GRE scores, could never predict these life circumstances. While there may not be any way for us in our programs to determine who will drop out due to competing life priorities, it's important sometimes if we can do exit interviews, not only with the students who are successful, but students that are struggling and are dropping out. It can help us look at our policies and practices that we currently are following in our programs. Finally, note that while the GRE scores cannot predict which students will drop out due to life circumstances, the GRE scores are helpful in determining who has the reasoning, critical thinking, and analytical writing skills needed for success for our program. Terry, I know you and I've talked before about admissions committee and how all that information sits in the electronic file cabinet and how we can make use of that. So you want to just comment on that?
Sure. One of the things that we mention when we're talking with different programs is in the admissions process, you collect all this information and you have good insight about the strengths, the weaknesses, the passions that applicants have, and then you admit them into the program. But what you need to do is take that information that you've collected and make sure that the advisor or mentors have that information so they can better shepherd the student through the program. They can better help them sort of navigate some of the challenges in their program. And when different opportunities become available, maybe what they can do is help match the opportunity with the passion of the student. So it's very important to use the application information that you have on the students you admit, again, to help them navigate all the challenges that they may face in their program.
And then there's a resource there that you can download. So here's a summary, holistic mission in a nutshell. Step 1, preparing. It's got setting the goals. There's the place where you can download the guide. Step 2, collecting the information. You can download benefits and drawbacks of each component. Step 3, reviewing the applicant files. And then step 4, selecting the applicants, and step 5, evaluating the admissions process. And so you can access all the little handouts that we've talked about throughout the process from here. In addition, you can go to this great website, Navigating Holistic Admissions. There's a digital guide that goes through each of the steps. It's a downloadable content that can be email, printed, and shared. And then finally, ETS is offering a holistic admission masterclass. It's free. If you want more insightful information about holistic admissions, you can go forward and sign up there at the link at the bottom. And now in the remaining few minutes, I'll just quickly go through the case study while I was at Dean at the University of Georgia. When I became Dean, one of the things administrators do, we listen. It's not that you don't listen as faculty, but I was very curious to go around and learn about all the programs we had in the graduate school. And the message that kept coming to me was that they wanted to increase underrepresented minority graduate students and also have better degree completion of all students, but especially underrepresented minority. And mainly what they're talking about at the time was Black or African-American students. So what we did was a series of things over the years. It doesn't happen overnight, but we began with our recruitment process, and we began to look at how do we reach out to historically Black colleges and universities, and we established feeder school agreements. We had one, and we used that as a model. We used the GRE search service to identify students. Every applicant that applied, we informed them about the GRE fee reduction program and the test prep. We spent many hours going, and I did this personally as well, revamping. I didn't revamp them, but I would go and look at their websites and give them some information about how they can be more student focused and use more social media. And we established a summer bridge to the doctorate program. We also pooled our resources, and faculty in different programs or programs within the same college pooled their own resources so that we could begin to support our underrepresented students, not only in recruiting them and bringing them to campus and summer programs, but also in terms of stipends. And then also supported all the STEM programs for recruiting as they did summer research programs. We would go and talk with them, and established a graduate and student organization called GAPS, and use those students to help us better understand the challenges that our own students were facing, and they helped us with recruitment. And then communication. And so used a software program that we could tailor our communication and timing and reach our students. And then in admission, the bottom line, no single component of the application predicts success. I will tell you that every program used the GRE, every program. But what we did was exactly what Terry's talked about, mapping. I encourage faculty to identify the knowledge, skills, and ability and characteristics that was key to success in their own programs. We stopped using cut scores. Our faculty came back and said, we realized that some of the highest scores were not the best predictor. We needed to look at a range of scores. And we moved more into a holistic admission where we were more inclusive than exclusive. And then that framing effect, faculty realized real quickly that that was so important. And so in interviewing students, they removed the GPA and GRE scores and other factors that would influence a faculty from not having a full open perspective on the student. And then in terms of degree completion, mentoring is so key, and understanding that the student doesn't need to be fixed. That's a deficit model, and understanding that students come from different cultural backgrounds and being culturally responsive and understanding that in our mentoring, using peer-to-peer mentoring, and of course, financial support is so important. And we went through our programs and we identified, each program did their own identification of barriers, of pathways to success. And, you know, what was tripping students up along the way? Were we not being transparent? How we were doing our preliminary or qualifying exams, or and that changed over time. And then we used our student organization gaps to build a community and assist with retention. And the end result, by the time I left, I increased graduate student body of African-American students by 54%. And we implemented an enrollment policy, resulted in shorter time degrees in all programs. We had data to show that, and with more degree completions. So to get more information about holistic admission, there's a site there and information about GRE test services. And if you have questions, both Terry and myself are available, and especially Catherine is there to reach out to your university. She's the academic partner. And then there's the GRE helpline. And now time for questions. But before we do, just advance to the next slide and then come back. Because in this deck, we have other examples of resources for you. And so when you get it, the PDF, you'll take a look at the appendices. Now we'll go back to questions.
I
So I'm
haven't
gonna
seen any come in
Okay.
so far.
So there
I'm
was
gonna
the one.
stop sharing.
Okay. And so there was the one about success. And I think hopefully I addressed that.
Can I ask you about the work that you did as a dean? How quickly did you see that increase? How, you know, in that whole process, what time frame are we looking at?
I was dean for 12 years. And so within probably 3 years, we started to see. So what we did was start with the feeder school. All right. And we said, okay, we already had that. So let's use that as a model. And that was coming from a school outside my state. And I said, well, why don't we look at our own students in our own state? So we used that as a model, fine-tuned it, and started with that. That took building relationships, because Georgia doesn't have a very good history, you know, with the segregation of that university, and long memories. So I had to build trust. And so we did that, and we visited schools, faculty visited schools, but also we did a whole program that was funded by the Council of Graduate Schools to look at degree completion. And faculty started to realize, oh my gosh, you know, we did this, we did that, we need to change that. And so they became more involved. Lots of conversations and sharing among faculty at lunch and learns. I would bring faculty, you know, I'd say, is your name Trini? You're doing this. Would you, we're going to do a lunch and learn. I want you to share with the faculty your experience in doing X. And that's what we did. And we had lots of good conversations. So it took a little time to get, but everybody was on board. I would go to other deans and say, okay, College of Arts and Sciences, these are 5 programs that are trying to do X. I'm going to put this money in, they're putting this money in. What are you going to do? And so we leveraged money across the board to help.
So yeah, and I wanted to thank you for the presentation and the information that you shared. I also want to highlight 2 things that I think are really important. And one, I was on a NIH grant that looked at implicit bias in STEM hiring, and what you're saying about the same kind of biases that we see in choosing or selecting applications, or just the way that we design our prompts or our materials could have implicit bias in them, is a very important thing to recognize. It's a very hard thing to combat, but the first step is recognizing that and then just working towards a better way at looking at that and establishing the criteria before you start looking at the applications, and designing those to try to clearly define to each candidate what they need to do. And I think that's an important step. And I wanted to just recognize that I found that refreshing and something that we all need to be reminded of many times.
Here's something I want to put out. Okay, During COVID, many of us were shut down, we're doing virtual. And so the questions I'm getting from students are, I was virtual, I was not face-to-face, that faculty didn't get to see or meet me. How do I ask them for a letter of recommendation? We need to be conscious about that and also help that student to realize how they can not only connect with us, but kinds of ways that they can put their material forward in the best possible light going forward. Thank you for your comments.
Yeah. No, Trini, I agree with everything you said, and with it sounds like you're doing really good work with your NIH grant. And you know, I think just recognizing, the first step is recognizing that biases start to creep in that we're not even aware of. And how can we change the process, change the directions to better address that? And it's, you know, when Maureen talked about evaluating the admissions process, we should never be satisfied. We should always look and say, what is it that we can improve next year? And then evaluate that. Did the changes we made, did the tweaks we did when we became more intentional, more explicit in our directions, did that have an impact? And was it positive? Was it negative? But never be satisfied. Always try to improve. I think that's so key.
One of the things that I'm doing right now is we have with two other institutions in alliance through funding through NSF to do AGAP. And we're working on underrepresented population to get them through the doctorate into faculty positions. And we're doing with small faculty groups across the 3 campuses, doing what I would call a professional learning community. We're giving them articles to read, research to read, and it's it's not me telling them, but let's look at this article. What's this saying? How does this relate? What does this mean for your program? And what are you seeing? And so through that, and the sharing of the faculty with different perspectives is so important. And that's where it can begin.
Sure. Any other questions, comments? Almost like teaching graduate school, you know, class, like pulling questions out. But it sounds like you have a really big weekend or big football game tonight and everything. So I know everybody's anxious to move on. And so.
But thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Sure, sure. We really appreciate that.
Well, again, Catherine, thank you for the wonderful partnership. We are deeply grateful to ETS for bringing leading experts from the nation, educating us about evidence-based practices, and we have a lot to think about. And I'll share this YouTube link with the campus community and the PDF as well. We have graduate council members as well here, members of the policy committee. Dr. West is here. So these are important issues because every decision that we make impacts a student who is admitted and most importantly, who is not admitted, right? Mm-hmm. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Maureen Grasso, and thank you so much, Dr. Terry Ackerman. We are indeed blessed and better informed. And we'll continue to keep these conversations with the faculty so we can find the right pool of candidates and admit the candidates that is a good fit with the program. So again, I remain grateful to all of you for your time and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.